when you said you were recording, I automatically folded my hands for some reason.
Did you really?
Yeah, like I folded my hands. I don't know why.
Yeah, but we can't even see your hands.
I know, but it was just like, I'm ready.
Is that something from childhood or something? You think?
I don't know.
Yeah,
Maybe.
yeah. Cause no, I remember like a very very early school, probably Korea. It's like when you stand attention, you kind of like either fold your hands or
Yeah.
do something,
Yeah, that's
right?
probably what it is. Just like it just kicks in. It's like, okay,
Yeah,
put on your presentation form or be presentable or something like
yeah. Or yeah, or something. I don't know. Yeah, it's kind of funny how these early childhood trainings kind of stay with you
for
uh,
sure.
for a very long time.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And but anyway, I think we're gonna be kind of going into that a little bit about because I think I reached out to you because I wanted to talk to you about family and
Yep.
parenting and all that stuff. Because you and I actually had a conversation about that some time ago. You were
Yeah.
talking about your kids, and I actually suggested, hey, I think you should do like a podcast or write a book or something.
Yeah.
And here we are talking about it on my podcast.
Which is cool, by the way. And I had a question, like, why, what was the inspiration for the name?
Oh, right. Yes. So, so beer cake, it's an actual thing. It's an actual cake, and
Oh,
it's the
okay.
first cake that I learned how to make.
Ah.
And it was a recipe that was handed down to us from our grandmother. Um,
Oh.
but that's not how I remember it. So it's really funny. And so it's just a funny anecdote kind of thing. And so when I was, researching podcast names, you know, there's so many podcasts out there now. Everyone's doing a podcast. And so,
I see. Sure, sure, sure.
so trying to come up with a unique name
All right, gotcha.
was kind of difficult. My first choice was something like Jamming with JJ.
Right, right, sure.
But somebody already had that. I don't think
Uh,
it was a podcast necessarily, but somebody had a website and maybe a YouTube channel, and they had a whole bunch of things, and it was like musical jamming sessions, um, which would have been fine, because I wanted to have a regular episode, like maybe once a month, with a musical guest, and all that, only
yeah.
because of my own affinity to music.
Mm,
Um, but anyway, so one day I was thinking like, okay, what's something that's uniquely me, that's part of
mm.
my life in some way? And one day I was just randomly thinking about the beer cake that we all used to make. We don't really make it so much anymore. Since I started the podcast, I've been making some, and
Nice.
and and handing it out to guests. So sorry. March has been like a weird month for me for some reason. Like uh things have been just creeping up, and I'm like me not sending you a proper follow-up email. I don't know. It's been weird. Um
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's springtime. Like the weather changes. I mean, I'm very sensitive to weather change.
ah,
So like as soon as I mean, I know it in my body that the weather is changing first before I hear it on the news. Like or if I don't hear it, if I'm not paying attention to the weather report or whatnot and like you know the wind starts blowing and then my body just kind of like goes, okay, it's time to wake up or it's time to go to sleep. It's just like different things. And yeah, it's
is
weird.
is that on a conscious level? Do you notice it on a conscious level, or it's just
um i'm
completely?
I think I'm becoming more aware of it. Like I actually make myself more aware of it just so that I can prepare myself, I
Mhm.
guess. Because I think before it would just catch me by surprise and throw me off, and then I wonder like what's going on. And then I realized, wait a minute, the weather's changed, and I mean, like spiritually speaking, the Bible speaks about the fact that we are creatures, right? And
Yeah.
we have the connection with nature and creation, and so when it changes, our body changes. It responds differently. So that's kind of how I understand that it really does happen. And
Yeah. Yeah. So just finishing out my beer cake story. So in reality, that's what happened. So our grandmother started making beer cake. Nobody seems to know exactly where she got the recipe or if she made it up. And and then taught it to the rest of us, and we started making it. But the way I remember it
Yeah.
is that I learned it from my aunt.
Ah.
So my grandmother's daughter, who's my father's sister, um, and that the backstory is that my aunt went to a restaurant, ordered this cake that turned out to be beer cake. She liked it so much, she asked for the recipe, brought it home, and started making it and taught the rest of us.
Ah.
Now, for some reason, like I know that story, like I heard it, like it actually happened. But when I tell this story to my sisters and my cousins, my aunt's, children, uh, no one, not a single person remembers any bit of it. So it's this weird thing, like either I dreamt it, made it up, or my aunt told it just to me and no one else.
Wow, that's a
Well,
mystery.
yeah, the third option is probably the least likely.
Uh,
But if I made it up, I'm wondering, like, why would I make up something like that?
yeah, yeah. And to be honest, it's like, it's like when my father passed away, right?
Mm,
You know, um, there were people telling me things about him or that and the experiences they had with him that obviously I never knew about,
yeah,
like there are things that, so it's really believable, to be honest, that it would be a kind of a unique story that your aunt shared with you because yeah, again, there's
I
it,
don't know.
no, it's just like I think it's believable because like I said, we have different, even though we could be family or whatever else, it's
Yeah.
not, we don't exhaustively share all our stories.
Yeah, that is interesting how, yeah, that I was talking to one of my earlier guests, was a comedian, and she commented that some of her closest friends would tell her, like, I know more about you from your comedy bits than just talking to you.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, because people
Yeah.
who have sort of either a public persona or on-stage presence or
Right.
something like that, it that does become a vehicle for us to share parts of our lives that we don't normally think about disclosing
Yeah,
to people around us.
for sure, for
Yeah.
sure. Yeah, and whenever my mom comes around and she's actually talking to my wife or talking to somebody whoever it is, not me, but she's talking to them. I'm kind of listening in and I'm hearing new stories or about me or about my dad or something like that, something I've never heard before.
Yeah.
So
Have you thought about documenting some of them?
yeah, I actually am. In fact, I just this week I suggested to my senior pastor that we should systematically record these faith stories of a lot of our older members,
Mm-hmm.
and then archive them, for the next generation or for anyone who would be interested in like listening.
Like like video?
Yeah, like video, like it would be like a
Yeah.
video interview.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think it's remarkable because of technology, just in the way we are able to, I mean, connect like this as well as record, things of loved ones.
Yeah.
Like I actually didn't realize it, but I actually had a Google phone number which I gave to my dad, and for some reason, when he called me, he only called my Google phone number. And he left all these messages,
Ah.
yeah, that I was like so thankful, like I was just switching over my number to a New York number and I saw all these messages on there and I started listening to them and I'm like, oh, like they're so precious, because he would just say things,
Ah,
on there, and his voice is all recorded. So I downloaded all of them to make sure I kept them. And I was like, this is so cool, like, to have, you know.
yeah. Um, hey, as I think today's topic is gonna be one where I'm gonna cry a lot.
Yeah, okay. I, I
just,
might too, but I don't know. I
just,
mean,
just
I've been
as you
trying
were
not
telling
to.
me that story, I'm like tearing up.
Yeah. No, I mean, it was a very moving moment, and I was listening to his voice and the things he was saying, and the quirky way he referred to himself. He would always start out, "Hey, Iggy, this is your old man," you know, and 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 then sometimes you go, I think one of the things that I felt very honored by was he would sometimes call me his pastor, you know,
Ah, nice.
hello, my pastor, and I just be like, so yeah, these were very precious recordings.
Um, so just to put into context for the listeners, so your father actually passed away in 2020.
That's right.
Um, not COVID related though, right? Yeah.
No, no, I mean indirectly because he was having heart issues, but he was afraid to go into the hospital,
Mm.
because
Oh,
of the
because of.
pandemic. He was like, he was really like he needed to go in, but he didn't want to because he was just like, if I go in, his thinking was I'm never coming out,
Oh wow.
which is probably true. I mean, at that time, I mean, nobody after you go in, nobody was able to go inside. No one else could, see him and everything. So it was a real blessing, I mean, like the one thing that I think, my mom is actually doing very well right now.
Mm.
Like, she's coming out of the deep sorrow of loss and this disorientation in terms of like, what is my life now kind of thing, which revolved around my dad. And then but the thing that I think that helped her a lot through that last year and so forth was that we would just constantly be like talking about how thankful we are for that as, if my father had to pass that and in the way he did was such a blessing, was which we were just so thankful, we're just thanking him all the time. You know
So the way he did. So if you wanna, I don't understand
yeah,
exactly what you.
sure. So it was June 1st,
Mm.
and like it was weird because the night before I had like you talk about this like link you have with people you love, right? And all night long it was like just the hardest thing for me to go to sleep, and it was, I remember struggling really hard that night.
Hmm.
And then like I finally go to sleep, and my mom calls me at like 6 in the morning, and she's like, your dad's not doing well, you know um you should come over, and we had he also had an issue with like making sure that whatever was going to happen at the hospital would not burden us financially. So he wanted us to wait until we could sign up for Medicaid
Mm.
before he would go into the hospital. So she tells me,
Oh.
okay, your father's not doing well. Can you go and can you come by, and we need to go to the Medicaid office, get him signed up so that we can take him into the hospital.
Yeah, just a quick note. I think you could do that retroactively too, because my father
Right.
passed away suddenly, so we didn't have
Mm,
time to do any of that, and so we had to
yeah.
do it retroactively. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, they've always been not too wise about things like that, and so then, I mean, obviously it was COVID anyway, but the fact was we went in. I mean, so I'm like, at first when I hear her voice when she calls me, and she has this voice, it's really like young, it's almost like she's dying herself,
Yeah.
and I know something's wrong, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Immediately I'm on alert, like something's happening. This was her voice when she called me to tell me my father first had a stroke, or things like that.
Mm.
So I'm immediately on alert, and she's like, okay, so yeah, you should come in, but don't come now, she said. come at like 9 o'clock. And then she goes, and have breakfast. And I was like, okay, it's like, okay, my
It's
dad's
like,
doing well, but she doesn't seem so urgent. And I go to the apartment and I'm like walking in and I'm dreading what I'm gonna find. Right? I'm dreading the scene, you know. I walk in, my dad's sitting up on the couch, he's smiling at me, you know, and and he's saying, yeah, he's telling me like he had a terrible night, he couldn't sleep, and that every time he lied down, his heart would tighten up or his throat would tighten up and stuff like that. I was like, oh boy. And so, I mean, I was just very wary and like, what is going on here? And my mom's like, she has this like, it's almost like you can't turn off this instinct to feed your children.
yeah.
So her concern, even at that moment, I mean, while my dad is like struggling and everything else, is to make sure I eat before we go out. So she's setting up the table. She's like, "Come and eat," and I'm like, "Okay, I can't even really read the situation well." And then my dad, he says something to me. He says, "Don't worry, I'm not gonna die today."
Mm.
He said to me. And so I go down, I sit and I'm eating, and he's talking to me again. And he actually gets up. He walks towards me, he gives me like the information I need, etc. And then my mom and I left to go and do this Medicaid thing. And then like before I left, we prayed for him. And on the way back, I it was like, I think on the way back home, H Mart was there, and I was like, do you need anything from H Mart? And so we stopped in just for a few minutes, like 10 minutes or so. She's a quick shopper, and we just picked up a few things. And when we got back, I walk in, and he looked like he looks like at any time I walk in and see him in this place. He was in his favorite position in the living room, in the favorite like with the TV on, with his coffee next to him, everything like that. But I look at him, and it looks like he's sleeping. But I go over, and he had passed.
Mm.
And I mean, it was just like, it's really I think one of the things that, if I were to if I say bug me about that morning, is his body was still warm. And if I had the mindset to like maybe even do CPR, I was thinking maybe he would have lived.
Mm.
And that kind of haunts me a bit sometimes. Think about that. And but all I could do was like, I was just shaking him and it was just yeah. So anyway, then the whole process of finding out what to do. I've never had anything like this happen for ourselves. And so the whole process of calling the police, letting them come with paramedics, declare him deceased, make sure that there's no foul play, etc., things like that, and call the funeral home. And as per his wishes, we had him cremated. Um, but again, it was just like, after the shock of everything, and after the funeral and everything else was still so full of grace, because we actually we actually got to see his body, like at the funeral home. They had actually the funeral, they did a great job just preparing him, and we went there, and my mom was like, he looks so good, he looks so at peace and happy and handsome. And she just remembers that, like how good he looked. and that was a real big comfort to her. And we had a little bit of a service there, um, and then we had another service at the church. So yeah, that's how he passed. And but we keep talking about it. Like, even if I had revived him somehow, and then had the emergency services come, there were all kinds of terrible scenarios. All we could see was just bad things
Yeah.
happen, like that he would just basically be taken away. But he had become so weak and everything else that even if he would have been on maybe life support or something, you know what I mean? And then, which he loathed. He made a sign, like a DNR, like, order. Like, he made us sign it, my
Yeah.
brother, because he one of the things he did later in his life was he used to translate for people at the hospital.
Oh.
Yeah,
So
and
he's
he
seen what
saw the
people
stuff
go through.
yeah, he saw that, and he just came home and he's just like, never ever let me, if I'm that gone, let me go. Don't try to like keep me alive. That's not living. He absolutely would have hated it. And we talked about a lot of different scenarios, like that he could have recovered,
Hmm.
but then he would have been had to put in a be put in like a nursing home because of how
Yeah.
weak he would have been to, and so forth. And then how, like, we were saying things like he would have absolutely hated being in the nursing home,
Oh yeah.
and to the degree that he would complain or fight with the people all the time, which would then make them respond with drugging him up,
Yes. Yes.
and basically like straitjacketing him inside, in his mind. And which was like, I thought of that and I was like, that's hell for my dad, and so, and also as people of faith, we it was something, we had to believe and trust, and let him go. So, yeah, it was all grace. We were thanking God every single time we got together, mom and I.
Yeah. Um. Sorry. I'm gonna have to. I'm gonna take a break so I can like wash my face or something. I can't see right now.
Yeah, sorry, DJ.
No, no, it's fine. I'm gonna pause the recording and I'll be right back.
Yeah, yeah, sure, sure, sure.
What were your parents? Because I know your parents as deacons in the church. I don't know them as
Yeah,
parents, you know?
yeah.
And so I'd be curious as to what kind of parents they were and what your childhood was like.
Well, to be honest, my childhood was pretty, I would say it was pretty um turbulent.
Mm,
Um my dad um my dad was actually not a good father in terms of the fathering aspect. He would, unfortunately, he would go from being over, like, almost like over disciplining, to the point of like where it's fueled more by his own rage and frustration, where he and to just give it some kind of context, he did not grow up with a father either. My grandfather passed early, and so he grew up just being kind of like, oh, and here's the other thing. So my father was the eighth child, no, the ninth child. Okay, my grandma had nine children.
was he the youngest?
Yeah, yeah, he was the ninth child, right? And he was the first surviving son.
Oh wow.
So number eight was a son, my uncle, who uh, died when he was an infant. And so he had seven older sisters, and then this uncle, finally they have a son and he passes, and then my dad was born. So if you can imagine,
Yeah.
starting with my grandma and my and the seven sisters, basically they were like, first and foremost, like bodyguards. Like, they just like basically protected him in every sort of way. he grew up a prince,
Mhm.
basically, and with prince like pride, if you will. He was gifted. He was brilliant, but nothing to kind of, I think, temper his gifts,
Mm.
you know, and give him a kind of a more focused way to apply his gifts. So it was like he was like this wild energy, ball of energy that just went in all different directions. A wild child, with So when it came to parenting, he had no clue.
Mhm.
He really didn't. If there was any kind of, I think, anything that I would say was very helpful as far as his parenting was concerned, it was that he at least taught me. I'm not sure about my brother, but at least it should have taught me to think to think a little outside the box on things,
Uh-huh.
and not just follow what everyone else says things are.
Yeah, just a quick note. You and your brother are actually quite different, I think.
Right. Yeah.
Personality-wise and interest-wise, like so many ways.
Yeah. We are very different.
Yeah.
But as far as I'm concerned, I learned to kind of have more of a, like, oh, you look at it that way, well, let me look at it this way, kind of a thing.
Uh-huh.
So I think I've always found that to be something particular to my either my nature, personality, or following my dad's example.
Mhm.
But my childhood was a rough one. I mean, he really couldn't hold down a job because he was always he was just always in the wrong kind of, like, for what he can do and what he's able to do. Every job would be frustrating to him.
Mhm. Mhm.
And then so that my mom was just the one who really did provide the consistency and support and everything else. And then when it came to discipline, he just didn't know how. He just basically, like I said, either raged or he would have like a pity party, to be honest. Like he would sit there and just go, I know I've not been a good father. And and to be honest, like when he would say things like that, I almost preferred the beating.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just did not want him to be doing that, and it made me sick to my stomach. And I was just like, I just, that was what I hated most. When he would do that. So he struggled a bit, and I think it's very interesting because I found myself, and when he passed, I had this incredible feeling of, like, love and devotion and connectedness. And I it was interesting because after he passed, one of my lifelong friends from the neighborhood, his name is Jimmy Rivera. So I was hanging out with him and he was comforting me and everything else. And he broke out these albums, pictures that he had taken when we were younger. And in and
Mhm.
amongst the pictures was a picture of my dad when he was, like, I think he was must have been in his, like, 40s or something. And I looked at that picture and I went, oh, you know what? I didn't like him in this when he was like this. And it was interesting how I'd forgotten
Well,
that,
when you say like this, what do you mean?
like, he was a chain smoker.
Okay.
He was just, again, he was this was before he actually came to faith and in Christ. And he was a different person. He was just, like, really, really, I always found him very selfish and self-absorbed. In all honesty, the one thing that stood out for me was one time. I mean, this he was such a smoker, and he just didn't care. Like, so he would smoke everywhere in the house. I mean, everywhere, right? And at some point, I kind of, like, as I was growing older, I kind of suggested to him. I said, Dad, can you actually just pick one place to smoke in? Because it's like smoke is everywhere in the house, and they get everywhere. And so and then he got all angry at me and stuff like that, right? And that's what I like. That was that picture. That's what that picture reminded me of. You know, he did his own thing. Couldn't really fit in the world and stuff, and so he just brought all of his stress in, home. And so when we were quote unquote disciplined, it didn't feel like discipline.
Mm.
It felt like he was just
Lashing out.
relieving himself of his own frustrations, kind
Yeah.
of.
Yeah.
So, but again, it changed all, and it changed long enough for me to almost forget it. And it was just that picture that kind of reminded me. you know
When did it change and how?
yeah, so it changed because, and talk about like something bad, God redeeming into good, is my mom. We were attending this little church. I'm not going to say which church, but she was she was scrimping and saving to give to this church, like a building offering, all these other kinds of things, at like risking my dad's anger, on it, and all this time, because he's not having any of it. He's not going to church. He doesn't believe in God, blah blah blah. And he's almost the most discouraging, or the one who was prohibiting my mom from going to church as much as she may have wanted to. Well, she goes, and finds out that the pastor had actually taken the funds that were set aside for a new building for the church, and he was investing it in personal property. So it was a scandal, right?
Wow.
And she went, and she was so distraught by this. So she went to him, and she tried to, she asked him for some explanation. And when she went to him, he basically tried to buy her off, like by saying,
Wow.
yeah, like, oh, I've been thinking that, we actually need like somebody at the church, and and I was always thinking of you as a good candidate to come and work for the church.
Hmm.
And I mean, basically, I had never seen my mom so lost. Like, she literally like couldn't go to work. She couldn't function. For like a week, she was just wandering the house, just completely devastated. Like trust and faith completely broken. Well, I come to find out that during this time, my dad had a real moment, and this is something I found out actually just 2 years ago.
Hmm.
And because what happened was he decided, and he committed himself to actually go to church with her, to make sure. And what he said was, I'm going to go with her, and I'm going to make sure that this next pastor is not going to do the same thing to her, because and so, but what happened during that time, and I only heard it 2 years ago, because he was sharing it with somebody, was he said he was driving around, and he was just distraught over my mom's situation. And this, like he said, it was like a thought just came right into his mind. And what it said was basically like, I'm a sinner. Like, I am helpless. I can't do anything for my wife. My wife is, you know, breaking down in pain, and there's nothing I can do for her. And that made him that just made him go, I'm a sinner. And I was just like, wow, that's so amazing, that to hear that testimony, even at this late a time. And he was sharing it with one of his friends in Korea, and I happened to be there and listening to him. So then, he went to, our church near Kangnyeong. And and despite what happened with Reverend Lee and everything else, God used him
Yeah.
to bring my father to faith. And then everything changed. I mean, yeah, there was some straight up miracles that happened in our family for him. Reconciliation, with his family in Korea, who
Oh,
basically he
were
just
they
said was no.
estranged?
They were estranged not because they did anything in particular to dislike each other. They were estranged because he was ashamed to go back,
Ah,
having done nothing with his life.
ah,
And particularly, he was ashamed to be in front of his mom, who like had adored and loved him. And so basically he does, because of his shame, had built this wall, and he couldn't. It was a shame, guilt. It was a wall of guilt and shame. But it was only through the gospel that was removed, so he could actually go there when my grandma was going to pass. And um and that was a miracle story too, because what happened, and my mom said that was a straight up miracle, because he was not going to go. He would not have gone if he was still loaded with this guilt. But because he was free in Christ, he was able to go there, face her, even at her deathbed. And apparently when they arrived, it was like on a Monday or something, right? And grandma asked him, first question she asked him is, how long are you here? Right? And he said, I'm here till like Friday, right? For a week. And then so she winds up like staying alive through the week, and she just
huh.
passes Thursday. She passed on Thursday so that then they could bury her, etc., and then he can fly back home free. So it was like a straight up miracle.
That is amazing.
It's really amazing. Yeah. And so, yeah, to my childhood, so my father changed, and he changed. At this point, in his change, I was already in college, right?
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So by
So
this time, I was a freshman in college, or a sophomore, and um,
that was right around the time when I met you.
yeah, exactly, right. And so, as far as any sort of like passing on of any particular pattern of discipline, or fathering children, I'll have to say my father did not really teach me anything really much, except to think outside the box.
Yes.
And there were some very, very precious jewels of wisdom he would share with me once in a while we were driving. You know, but
Um, what I find interesting is, so sometimes what we, uh, you know, I I should have mentally prepared for this. I knew something like this could happen, but I didn't brace myself like strongly enough. Well, I don't know if that would have helped, but because you know me,
sure,
this is
yes,
me.
yes, yes.
Anyway,
That's the good part of you that I'm glad hasn't changed.
and I'm sharing it with the world. um, so sometimes, what we learn from our parents or from people in general or environment in general is sometimes we model after what we see, but sometimes it's the opposite. We see what we don't like, and we, you know, either subconsciously or consciously decide this is not the way. I don't know. This whoever's listening to this is gonna be a very frustrating episode. Maybe I should just edit my parts out. um, but yeah. So the comment is, sometimes we model after what we see, and we become that.
Yeah,
But sometimes what we see is, we decide either consciously or subconsciously to actually not be that. So actually go in
right,
a either in the opposite direction or something very different.
sure. That's true.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know if I ever thought about it too much, but I think actually, in again, being very open and forthtelling about everything, I think I was very much, without even realizing it, in the same pattern.
Huh.
You know, it took, getting married, having our first child, and then like I think a year or a year and a half into our marriage, or a year when my daughter was around a year and a half old, I had a revelation because I was coming into the house and apparently I was raging. Like I was
Wow.
raging at things like like the mess in the house or
Yeah.
whatever else that was, and my wife just in her very like powerful way, she just asked me a simple question. She says, "Why are you so angry?" And it was the most like dumb. I was in a dumbfounded moment. I was like, "What do you mean? Why am I so angry? Isn't it obvious? It's not obvious, right?" And then I sat down. I'm like, and I was just thinking about. It, I was like, well, "Yeah, why am I so angry?" And then that's when I realized, at least at that point, I was like, "Oh my gosh, this is like if I think play it back, it's like this is very similar to what I experienced with my dad."
Yeah.
And so that at least getting aware of that helped me to kind of focus on trying to deal with that better, and especially with given the particular kind of knowledge I've been given, and the help that I've been promised, in my faith to really kind of tap into that to overcome it. And I'll be honest, I'm still a work in progress.
Aren't
um
we all?
Aren't we all, right? But yet I can say there's progress, and that I am generally a less angry person, you know, and I'm thankful now that my wife is able to actually testify to that, you know, and she'll say to me, "Well, oh, you surprised me because you could have been so angry at this situation, but you're not,"
Yeah.
or something like that.
Yeah.
And then, but the one thing I do remember, like conscientiously going, I will never do that, was smoking.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because it had bothered me so damn much growing up.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And here's a if, to all the listeners out there, whoever are smokers, I want you to know, like this secondhand smoke, it's bad stuff because I'd gotten, I think, some kind of checkup, and they had done some X-ray on my lungs, and they're like, "Were you a smoker?"
Oh wow.
Yeah, and like you have all these like like I don't know, lesions or whatever on your lungs that looks like you have scar tissue, like you've been a smoker. And I was like, no, I never smoked in my life, but it was all just the secondhand smoke, you know.
Did your father ever quit, or when
He
did he quit?
did.
When did he
That's
quit?
another miracle story. You ready to cry some more?
All right. You know what?
So
I have to blow my nose. I'll be
yeah.
back. No, I'm serious. Speaking of smoking, my father was a smoker too,
Mm,
and he stopped pretty cold turkey when he was in his maybe 50s or something. I
mm,
never asked him about it.
mm,
But yeah, I mean he started smoking when he went into the army, and
yeah.
which is what
Very, yeah.
most guys do. They pick up.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was just very natural for everyone, you know what I
Sure.
mean?
Yeah.
So that it was understandable. But how my dad quit smoking was he had started coming to church. He had, really kind of become intrigued by what he was hearing. And so for the first time, there was something in the messages that were very intellectually um, appealing and searchable, or like he could himself like look up things and things like that. And so he started doing
Uh-huh.
that. And so his faith was growing because he was actually reading for himself. Um, and part of this thing was that he decided to join the choir because he loves music, you know,
Mm.
and we joined it together. I joined it because I couldn't understand everything that was being spoken in Korean, and the choir sat up and down a lot during the service and kept me from sleeping. So I joined the choir because of that. And then we went to choir together, and then all of a sudden, one day he goes, "This is not right. I'm trying to sing, and I can't even sing properly because of my smoking."
Ah.
And he says, "This is not worthy of God." And so, because of that, he quit cold turkey. And it was a miracle too, because he had been trying like different things to try and quit. Like we've seen that for years.
Mm.
But this was the first time he just said, "I'm just gonna stop." And like he did. I mean, it was hellish for like several months. He would just, again, walk in the house, and because of his nicotine cravings and all that
Yeah.
stuff, he would just walk in, see us just sitting there doing whatever, and just yell at us for a while, and then go outside and walk the block for like half an hour and come back. But we were just so like amazed that he actually went, he cut it off. And yeah, so yeah, that's how he wound up quitting. And
Yeah, my father never went through that period. Like he was not an emotionally up and down man.
mhm,
He was actually quite reserved, and he didn't get outwardly upset or angry. Although he was a sulker, so like when he was quiet, and he went into his room and you didn't hear from him, that means he was upset.
mm, mm.
And he was like that because of his father,
Oh
because
yeah.
his father apparently was a very outwardly angry man.
Oh, I see.
And so when he was young, actually my father was relatively young when his father died,
Mm,
but um but for however long he knew his father, my father, seeing that and seeing how um disruptive and
mm, mm,
and just unsettled the household was because of his father's anger, he that was a conscious decision for my father
I
to
see.
never ever be outwardly emotional, like that, to the detriment of his family. So yeah,
Mm,
he kept everything to himself,
gotcha.
which so he went like completely the opposite direction. And so um yeah. So, which is kind of interesting. I mean, he
Yeah.
did get upset every once in a while. And he did, yell at us every once in, but it was very seldom.
Mm, mm, mm,
Yeah.
mm,
Um, but yeah, one day he quit, and I don't even know why, you
mm,
know. And so he never went through that emotional period like he was, became more or less. He was pretty much the same.
mm.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
But I think it might have had something to do with church too. My father, maybe, I'm not sure.
Mm.
Yeah. Um, what was your mother like?
So, my mom was, um, my mom is just this like compact, like, um, uh, ball of uh, what seemed to me like limitless energy, I guess. I
Mm.
mean, um, she would work all day, come home and, cook and clean and, and she had no, what we would consider life, you know, really didn't. She's just now discovering like things she likes.
Oh wow.
She's on her own and she's just learning that, right now. I mean, that's what I see because she just never had time for it, or she was just concerned with feeding us, keeping a roof over our heads because my dad, it was just so inconsistent with that, and so but I will tell you that like the one time I remember where I was a teenager and I offended her because I'd come home like after curfew, right? And it was maybe an hour or so past what I said I was going to be. And
Mm-hmm.
I come in And she was like telling me, she's like, you made me worry for this past hour or so, right? And I just, as a, in this typical teenager way, I'm like, what's the big deal? Like, like, it was no big deal. I was fine, and etc. And like I said, like, I'm sorry, okay. And I started walking off on her, and I mean, without a warning, I just get like hit in the back of the head with a stick. And then after I get hit, like, I mean, she's screaming and she's just like beating me everywhere. Like, there's no rhyme or reason to it. She's just like wailing on me. And I'm sorry, mom, I'm sorry. And I was just like, okay, all right. It's like my dad's, I guess, raging and stuff. Like, I'll be honest, maybe sometimes it was more bark than bite.
Uh-huh.
But my mom, oh, I'm like never going to be like that to her again, and give her that kind of and be flippant about her concern, you
Well,
know.
it was disrespect.
Right, yeah,
Yeah.
right. Yeah, but
Um,
that particular thing is a big button with her when you just dismiss her
yeah.
worry and concern.
Yeah.
Yeah, and man, she went off. So I was just like,
Yeah. Because,
yeah.
that's her right as a parent.
Yeah.
You might even say it's her duty.
Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, and for you to dismiss that, that's like, yeah,
Right.
that's almost dismissing her parenthood.
Sure.
Yeah.
And she was the only thing that I remember my mom just insisting on to us all the time is to go to church with her.
Uh-huh.
That was pretty much it. Like, there was really nothing else. So
So, yeah, so were you going to church like um from early on with
I
her?
was, I went to church from early on. I remember, when it was in elementary school, it was mostly like a social thing. In high school, it was still also a social thing, but I was more like reluctant to go. And then when I went, I just basically I just brought a lot of skepticism to everything that was being taught to me. And so, another context thing is my father was, by his area of study was philosophy,
Mm-hmm.
and Marxist philosophy at that. So religion is the opiate of the people.
Ha.
And here's my mom, who's just like completely devoted and everything. So I was just like, I went to church, and I think I may have been a theist. I may believe that there was a God, but I didn't believe the God of the Bible, and I didn't really take seriously what was being taught to me from scripture.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I was always like raising questions in the Bible study and being a real pain in the butt to everyone who wanted to teach me anything from there. I was just not, and it was just like this inclination, to like not believe.
But that skepticism, though, I think on some level is healthy, because I think the fact that, I mean, you and I, we both taught Sunday school, and 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 kids will ask questions, and you want to encourage that. Um,
Right. No,
yeah.
and skepticism I'm putting in terms of the negative category.
Okay.
There is a way you can be inquisitive,
Uh
or
huh.
or want to know more, or be curious,
Okay.
right? In
But
the
it
in the
wasn't
way
that.
in the way that yeah in the way that you're genuinely like have almost your disposition is very important, is what I'm saying.
Hmm.
So you can be disposed to, with any information we get, with any person we deal with. Disposition is key. It's
Hmm.
like, what are you trying, what are you really thinking to, like inclining your heart to receive from them. If you're wanting to receive good from them, you're going to take their words, and even if they are possibly hurtful or critical, and you may take it positively.
Mm.
You if you're disposed to not like the person, then anything they say that is trying to be helpful
Yeah.
is going to be perceived as an attack or anything like that. And that's what's happening all the time, in our world today.
Yeah.
you know And that's the same way we approach, things of faith or truth or things like that. There's a way to understand more with a desire to know more,
Yeah.
and then there's a way to come into it with like this kind of desire to not know more and dismiss everything.
So you're saying, in your case, it was the latter. You were
It was
being
the latter. It was
you
the
were.
latter. It was like I just didn't want to bother with it. I didn't want to know it, right?
Uh-huh.
I had in it when it was mostly born out of a very prideful mindset I had. That I reasoned it out, and to me it didn't make sense,
Mm.
and so my pride blinded me and inclined me towards dismissing, that part of the faith,
Right. Right.
like that any structure to give to my theism,
Right.
any means of relationship, and everything requires a certain kind of structure for relationship. You can't just kind of like, um, you know, um, if you say you love someone, then okay, well, tell me how you're going to love them, right? In what way are you? I mean, there's very explicit things that need to be there. You can't say you love someone and never talk to them,
Right.
or things like that, right? And you can't say you love someone but you never know them, or you say, oh, I love these particular people in Papua New Guinea. Okay, great. What is that? So
Yeah.
what does that do, right? What is that? You know what I mean? It has to have some kind of connection, like way of connecting, way of interacting, a way to actually manifest that love, right? And I think that's really what it is with, sometimes in our faith, is that we may profess love for God, or we may profess, but then we just don't want to bother with all of the details of it, or how that relationship should be, in some sense, entered into, and especially talking with the other person, who is in this case more important, in terms of, listening to what they say is important to them in terms of the relationship, right?
Mm.
And so that's what it was, and I just didn't want it. I didn't want it. Yeah.
I still think, though, the fact that you were questioning it, even though it was dismissive, um, that that's still something, because a completely disengaged person is harder to reach than
I
someone who's,
absolutely agree with
yeah,
you on that. I absolutely agree with you on that. I think in my ministry, in life, the hardest person to reach or talk with even are the people who are intentionally
yeah,
putting aside those questions. They're not even, they don't even consider it. They don't even want to discuss it. They're just like, I've made my particular non-faith position, that which they think is non-faith, is it's well, people say technically that's faith too, but they say, it's like it's a non-faith position. I don't want to believe, right?
yeah,
And it's an intentional, constant, working at not believing. You know what I mean?
yeah,
Which is actually very. I learned that in portrayed very well in this series called "The Question of God," where this it was a PBS kind of special where they contrasted the life of Sigmund Freud and C.S. Lewis,
uh-huh.
and how these brilliant men both wound up with such completely opposite faith positions. You know,
Were they contemporaries?
no,
Why were they
no.
compared together?
Well, Sigmund Freud came first, and
Yeah,
and in his life, the comparison was, in some sense, I think, you could say that they were almost championing the opposite causes,
mm.
right? And so even though they weren't at the same time, and Sigmund Freud came first, and for me, I always see things as providential, and where God orchestrated. It was
Sure.
almost like an argument in history, where Sigmund Freud was championing non-belief, right? And God raised up C.S. Lewis to kind of rebut that, you
Right.
know. like that kind of in history. So it's that there's a argument that's going on in history, with different people, that are coming out. And so it's an incredible series. I actually highly recommend it. That is where I actually found, in C.S. Lewis's case, he was what I call an angry atheist.
Hmm.
He chose not to believe God because he was upset that God was not being what he thought God should be,
Yeah, right.
right? And then there's a progression. You know, Sigmund Freud, completely opposite, is an intentional atheist.
Yes.
He's committed to this position of atheism, and so that again takes a lot of, like, I think, as much faith, right, to
Um,
to
I
do.
wouldn't say, yeah, I wouldn't use the word faith. I would characterize it as more as a religion. So faith and religion are actually different things, because you see that in sort of people who are secular. Um, they're very dogmatic in their
Right, okay,
secularism.
yeah,
So
okay, that may be a better way to say it. But yeah, he's an intentional atheist. He
yeah.
just, is really bent on not believing, and it was incredible. Like, I think one of the most moving stories was, he his father, Sigmund Freud's father, who was religious, gave him
Uh, yes. Go ahead.
gave him the family Bible,
Uh huh.
the Old Testament, the Hebrew Testament. And in it he wrote and said, my son, something to the effect of, I want you to read this book and search its hidden treasures of knowledge and everything else. And so it was a plea for him to kind of like take from this a different perspective and
Uh huh.
allow it to kind of, enrich his life, which he just completely rejected. He was, again, dogmatic and committed, and so he rejected it. And then, unfortunately, to me, what I found very interesting was, he was so committed to empirical kind of evidence and being able to test things and everything else, and he hits some kind of a wall, and as to explain the meaning of life and whatnot, and so he turns more inward
Mm-hmm.
to what I think is the one of the most difficult things to prove empirically, or
Yes.
reassess, which is his dreams, right?
Yes.
And so it's just very ironic in that way that he goes more inward
Yes.
into himself rather than having anything else kind of really speak to his
I
understanding.
I would actually be curious as to what his relationship with his father was like. And I would imagine, even just by that little snippet that you shared, that it wasn't very good. Um,
Well, at the very least, it was detached, meaning
yeah.
his father was like a businessman who was busy with work, and then he had a babysitter, a nanny, who had a very huge influence on him, who was actually
Mm.
Christian
Mm.
and would
Oh,
take him to
interesting.
church and stuff like that.
Interesting.
Yeah, yeah, very
Yeah.
interesting. So that series I highly recommend.
Yeah.
It's I think it's just great. So
Because also what he's famous for is the whole ego, superego, and the Freudian Oedipus complex, electro complex, and
right,
the things that he's commonly known for,
right,
is there's a lot of I mean, if you look at his anal psychoanalysis principles and psychoanalyze those, there's a lot there. You
sure,
know what I mean?
yeah,
that he's trying to exercise something from
yeah,
his own life.
sure,
But anyway, yeah, I recently read um, C.S. Lewis's Mere Christianity,
Mm. Oh,
Yeah,
I love that book.
yeah, um, yeah. Actually, I do want to read more of his stuff. Um, yeah. Audible is amazing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, because it lets you quote read books while you're
Yeah.
doing other things and stuff. Because I'm not somebody who's ever been very good about sitting down with an
Oh yeah.
actual book for
Yep.
lengths of time. It's
Right.
like, yeah, I get so distracted so easily.
Oh
I
yeah.
don't know how I ever got through school,
Yeah.
reading all those textbooks.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm amazed myself.
Um, but yeah, okay. So that's how you were. So you were a very aggressive skeptic.
Yeah, I was a prideful skeptic. I was like,
Yeah.
my own thoughts are better for me and satisfying to me than the answers that are given to me, from scripture or otherwise, and ultimately it was my way of being keep creating a faith of my own making, right? That had its comfort level on all these different levels. I'm comfortable with this.
Yeah. Yeah. I find that and just listening to different people, especially people who are incredibly um I guess dogmatic about what they believe and the way they believe and all that. Um, like the more stubborn they are in their position about one aspect or another, um, the more I feel like they are actually creating God in their own image.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
for sure. Yeah, it's an instinct. It's a natural instinct to do that,
yeah.
unfortunately.
So, but here you are, so many years later, and
Mm.
you're a pastor.
Yeah,
And so at some point that changed.
right. So, and going along with the same idea of skepticism and everything else, I went into uh, freshman year. I had basically verbally declared my independence to my mom from the tethers of her faith.
Uh-huh.
I said, well, I'm my own man now, and so don't tell me to go to church anymore. I just told her explicitly. I said, don't bother me about going to church anymore, so I'm not going. And then that was September, and then for 2 months, I was kind of uh, providentially hounded um, by one particular person who basically wanted to do Bible study with me, like on campus. I would just run into him all the time, and then he was like, "Let's do Bible study," and I'm like, "No, I don't want to do Bible study." But like, I would just keep running into him. Like, I
Uh-huh.
mean, it's NYU campus, and I'm constantly running into him, and I'm like, this is ridiculous. So I'm like, just to get him off my back, I said, okay, let's do Bible study.
Uh-huh.
And when we did, it was really like I don't remember anything about it. It wasn't moving or revelatory or anything else. It was as I expected. I brought out my questions. Like I had these loaded questions. I had this questions, like set of questions that I always had for these people who wanted to teach me anything.
Tell me
And
one.
why did God put the tree of the garden of tree of the knowledge of good and evil in the garden?
Yeah.
I mean, isn't it like putting a gun in the kitchen, a drawer and telling your kids not to play with it? Something like that. It's just like these kinds of things. Anyway, I remember walking out of that, and what he said to me at the time was, it looks like you're not ready, or something, right? Your heart's not ready. And I was just like, psh, typical answer, like, and I walked out of there, um, like if I've ever tasted like, and was given an insight into my own arrogance, it was
Uh-huh.
right at that moment. I still remember it very vividly because I walked out of that room. As I was walking down the hallway, I entertained the notion that I just disproved the existence of God.
Uh-huh.
And I was like reveling in my own like power of
Uh-huh.
reasoning or something like that, and that I had done, and it was really weird. I almost like exulted in the fact that I had just beat down this guy,
Yeah.
like, and made him, like, made him now, doubt his own faith and things like that. And of course, the most humbling thing was that I think it was like, a day or two later, I run into him again. He's like, okay, so when do you want to do Bible study again? And I'm just kind of like, what the heck
It's
is wrong with you?
it's like that toy when that you punch it,
Right,
falls, comes back up.
right. So anyway, I for some strange reason, I accepted the invitation again, and I sat with him. And this time, we ate together, and during the meal, he shared me his testimony.
Hmm.
And he had, basically, it was really um like interesting that he had gone through a terrible tragedy in his life, right? Which would make you go like, and you said you believe God and he did this to you or allowed it to happen to you, and then but you still believe him, and then he's basically saying he's thankful for what happened to him because it made him go deeper into faith in Christ. And I looked at him and I just went like, that does not compute.
Yeah.
That it was just something beyond my capacity to reason in this. And the authenticity of it, I think, moved me. It was not like he was just saying it, just to get me to some particular point. He was really sharing a genuine testimony of where he was in regards to his faith, that despite the tragedy of what I would think is absolutely everything you don't want to go to God for, it has happened to him. And so it shook that foundation of what I like had as far as my reasoning is concerned, what I can trust in. And so then when we did another study, and then again, I don't remember any contents of the study, nothing revelatory.
Mm.
But the one thing that happened was afterwards he said, "Let me pray for you." And I said, "Sure." Like, I've had so many people pray for me. Like it's just something I just go through to get, to just go on and not leave my life, right? But as he was praying for me, I genuinely felt moved to accept, and so without his prompting, after he finished praying for me, because I had heard the sinner's prayer over and over again,
Yeah.
I just entered into it on my own, and I just prayed that prayer. Now, it's very, it was interesting because it's not like right afterwards, after receiving Christ, and the forgiveness he brings, I said, it wasn't like, angels were singing and, lights were going off and things like that. But here was the definite, the incredible difference. As I left the room, I was first of all surprised to find that I still had all those questions.
Yeah.
They didn't just disappear,
Yeah.
right? I mean, the questions were still like stacked up in my mind, and so forth. The huge difference was not only were there questions, but there was also a presence reassuring me regarding those questions that, don't worry, I'm going to answer every one of your questions.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that just kind of like, I remember just that being so amazing. Just thinking about it, like, wow, it's just like, it was nothing like I expected, you know, but it was something so marvelous in its own way that I had a confidence that these questions I had would be answered. And I can testify now, after having been a Christian for, 30 plus years, that he's been faithful in answering these questions for me, and so and not in that way where and also I think a fruitfulness of that is where it's not where I go around thinking I know everything,
Mm.
but um but and it's also this kind of idea that I actually I actually know, but I also know how much I don't know.
Right.
And so it's an incredibly like different dynamic. Instead of building me up into this sort of arrogant kind of mindset, I'm very humbled by what I'm, um, by all that I still need to know and understand, and so yeah, so that's kind of how it happened.
Yeah. And I think the way I look at it is, in that moment you entered into a relationship with God.
Right.
And that's really what it is at the core of what life of faith is a
Yes,
relationship.
that's right. Amen. Amen.
And I think we were talking about that earlier, right? Something about relationships, how we relate.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't remember what exactly what we're talking about. Yeah, but anyway, uh, so that was September of '86. You
No,
said
it
freshman
was
year.
it was freshman year, November 16th, 1987, between 6 and 7 p.m.
Um, Sep '87. So wait, you went to college in '87?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, but we're the same age, I think.
Yeah,
Six.
I think I might have been held back 1 year. I don't know.
Okay. Yeah. But anyway, a year later, that's when we met. Is in the summer of '88. So
Mm-hmm.
it was, for me, it was August 6th, between 6 and 7 p.m.
Yeah, I still remember that. You were in your goth mode, all black.
I know, but it wasn't really goth. It's
It
just
wasn't goth.
black.
Okay, it wasn't goth, but it was like dark.
Yeah.
You were in dark mode.
Uh, yeah, I just liked, I don't know at the time if, I mean, I still wear all black,
Right, right.
but it's not in the same way. I mean, I just wear black because it's easy.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, I remember specifically I had a spaghetti string sort of long dress, and on top of that I had this torn up t-shirt, both black, and I had probably had black sandals or something like that. And I remember, so okay, so let me tell you that story. Why I was there. So, as I said earlier, I grew up in a Christian home, so I went to church. I think as soon as I think way back when, this is back in Korea, my father at the time did not go to church. And he was a teacher, so Sunday was his only day off. And so either because of that, my mother didn't press him or something, but he did allow her to go to church on her own. That was perfectly fine. And I say allow, and this is a different time and different culture, where I mean, it's not necessarily like husbands allowing wives, to be independent in certain ways, and if it's not that, then it's necessarily oppressive. It's just, how the society functioned. I don't know. You know what? Never mind. I'm not gonna try to explain all that. But anyway, um, yeah. So she went off to church, but she went to church. Oh, I know what happened. Okay, so she went to church in our own neighborhood because by then we had moved into this new neighborhood. And so she didn't bring the rest of us with her because it was sort of far away. So we went to a local church that we could walk to. And so I didn't start going until I was entered like first grade or something like that. That, I guess that's when our parents considered us old enough to kind of like, you know, go places, you know, unaccompanied by adults. Um, anyway, so yeah, so we grew up that way, and then we came to the U.S. and in a lot of different immigrant communities, the faith organization tends often becomes the cultural center as well, right? So
Yes.
that's where you go to meet others from your cultural background, and you do things, and you make friends and build that community. And so I think in some ways that's what it was for us, or at least for me anyway. I think my mother, she went because she was devout. My father didn't go for a long time, and well, he went sometimes. So my father was on and off and all that. But anyway, long story short, or shorter, um, I went to church kind of. It was sort of, in your earlier years, you kind of piggyback on your parents' faith, or some people do.
Yes.
And so it doesn't become your own until you do at some point make some sort of a conscious decision.
Right.
Um, and that decision could be dramatic or not, or we often, when we hear testimonies, oh, I was in a car accident, I almost died, and
No.
that's, for I would say for the majority of us, that's not what happens.
No. Mm.
Yeah. Um, but so but as I entered into, I would say, teenage years, towards latter half of high school, that's, I think, when I began to sort of um, uh, rebel in my own way. And I don't think I was ever an atheist. I think I was always a theist, that there was something out there, but that not necessarily it had anything to do with me. Um, or in some ways, I also saw it as kind of like, uh, no, I just reject you, and not you, and your existence, but more like, you know, get out of my life kind of thing.
I need my space.
Yeah. um, you know. Anyway, so that's where I was. And then in 1988, that was my year off. So I went to NYU actually, you know, and I went for a year, and then I was completely lost in terms of like what it is that I wanted to do with my life, and all that. Um, and I wasn't doing very well academically because I was just so uh, directionless. And so I decided to take a year off to figure out, something. And I took, odd jobs here and there. Um, and the summer of '88, a friend of mine called and said, hey, he was working as a counselor at this day camp for disabled kids. And he said, hey, there's an opening, somebody quit or something like that, and there was 5 weeks remaining to the day camp, and we need someone, so do you want to come and help out? I'm like, sure. And at that time I had just quit a job that I was doing for a majority of the year that I was off, and so I had intended to take the summer off before school started. But my friend called, and I was like, okay, disabled kids. And at the time, I didn't like kids. And I thought that that was a handicap, of mine in terms of like my own personal development. And I felt like, um, not that I ever, had intentions of becoming a parent, but I thought I might have to deal with kids in the future for some reason at some point. So, hey, I might as well deal with troubled kids now, you know, and
The
and
deep end.
like if I could handle that, then I can handle, normal kids, right? So I agreed. So I was there, and at some point it became very hard. And so the kids who were in that camp, they run the gamut from emotionally disturbed
Mhm.
to autistic to some with just physical handicaps. I think
Mhm.
one kid was his only handicap was cerebral palsy, but he was severely cerebral palsy, so he couldn't
Mhm.
really talk or anything. So it was like all over the place, and trying to deal with all that when I had not dealt with kids prior to that, it was like it got to be a little too much.
Yeah. Imagine.
And then the retreat rolled around, and my sisters, I think you know my sisters.
Of course.
Yeah. So my sisters, of course, they were planning to go, and by that time, um, my parents, especially my mother, decided not to press me too hard. They just mentioned it. Hey, this retreat coming out.
Mhm.
It's like whatever, but they didn't force me to go anymore. Um, but then I really, really needed to get away from these kids, and my parents being still, strict parents.
Mm.
I knew that I could not go off on an overnight vacation by myself. Like they would not allow that. And so I decided, okay, I'm going to agree to go on this retreat so I could get away from these kids. And I just won't talk to anyone, and, I'll act very antisocial and nobody will bother me, right? That's what I was thinking. And, and I knew like if I had agreed, like, of course my mother would be happy, and that was the one place where I felt like I could go, and my parents would agree to let me go, and I could get away for a weekend. So, lo and behold, I go and I don't talk to anyone. But then you come up to me, much like the way your friend came up to you, and you're like introducing yourself and trying to talk to me and all that. And I think I probably gave very curt answers. Like I didn't want to be rude,
Sure.
but at the same time, like I really wanted to discourage continued conversation. And so I think the first night of the retreat, the worship service, everybody was seated in the sanctuary. And I intentionally sat way in the back, away from everyone because I didn't want to share any kind of even physical space with people. And then you come up to me again and you're like, hey, do you mind if I sit? Oh, no, no. At first you were like, hey, come on up, let's sit up there. And I said, no, I'm perfectly fine right here. And then you invited yourself to sit next to me. And I'm like, okay, how do I get away from this guy? And then, of course, I end up in the same Bible study group that you lead. Yeah. And then the rest is history.
Yeah.
Yeah, actually, I think I wanted to bring that up because you were the annoying friend in my life.
Yeah.
um, yeah. Um, what did you study in college?
Well, I started out as a biochem major, and then in my sophomore year, in the summer of my freshman year, going into sophomore year, I had a kind of like moment of what am I going to do, or I wanted to um, not do biochemistry. I wanted to do something that had at that time some kingdom consequence, something about bringing the gospel as a missionary, as a lay missionary, in fact. And so I changed my major from biochemistry to German and East Asian studies,
Huh.
with a emphasis on I really wanted to do a double major of German and Japanese, which was like the most ridiculous thing. But I did have to take a language for the East Asian studies, so I took Japanese, and I just thought like I was gonna be this like quadrilingual, like international businessman, and it had a real kind of uh, like cool, image to it. So that's what I tried doing. Um, Wound up that I mean, I did graduate with those degrees, but um, it I had no real bones for business, and so wound up like really confused in my junior year, end of my junior year. So I took a year off between my junior and senior year, And I just prayed through that year and decided that instead of beating around the bush about, wow, I'm going to be this businessman who does mission work in Japan, I was just going to commit myself entirely, to ministry. And at that time, I was thinking missions. And so I came back with a goal, and I finished out my senior year, and with the express intent of just applying to seminary. That's how it happened.
Did you end up going to Westminster?
I did.
Okay.
I was
Yeah.
in Westminster for a year and a half, almost 2 years, and then I wound up transferring to biblical.
Oh, that's
The
right. I remember that.
yeah, the circumstance under that was another book. So we're not going to go into that too much here, but
Okay. Yeah.
yeah, it was. I mean, I'm thankful that I was able to go to both schools. I think they gave me uh, the kind of a mix of emphasis,
Mm-hmm.
which I thought was particularly for me, it was helpful to know and have. And yeah, so
Yeah. Um, it's kind of funny. I wanted to talk more about family stuff, but we end up like down these like tangents, which is perfectly fine.
right.
But let's kind of come back to family, because
Okay.
oh, do you have a hard stop? Because we're approaching like hour 3 or end of 3.
Um,
Oh no, we have one more hour. Never mind.
yeah, but I need a bathroom break.
Yeah, let's do that. Okay. Yeah, I'll pause.
Okay.
What is that? Is that iced tea?
It's just some cranberry juice with water.
Hmm. Nice. So you're in Westchester now?
I am.
Okay, and your family moved with you?
They did.
Okay, because I was a little confused about that because I think because some of your social media, you were back in Portland for a while,
Yeah.
or
So last year was crazy, right?
uh-huh.
June 1st, my dad passes, and then in August 2nd, my daughter got married,
Yeah.
and so I flew back for that, and then we packed up the house. We had a three. It was a Choi convoy. 3 cars. Like I was driving the moving truck. My wife was driving the minivan. My son, my middle, was driving his car, and we drove, across the country, and we dropped him off in Cleveland because he's going to Case Western, and
Uh-huh.
so it was married off the daughter, pack up, drive across the country, drop off my son at school. It is starting his freshman year at Case, and then drove the rest of the way to New York. And then, we were staying at the church has a parsonage. We stayed there for like a month, looking for a place, and then we found one. And then moved in, and then registered my son to go to school, and it was like a whirlwind. So
That's what happened because I think you came to the East Coast first on your own.
I,
Okay. Oh, because they probably had to finish out school and stuff.
yeah,
Okay.
exactly. Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
That my middle was in his senior year, and so
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, okay, so that's the confusion cuz like it felt like, wait, did you all move? No, you didn't move because there were still like posts about
yeah,
Portland and yeah. So
yeah.
you had a lot of different life-changing
Oh my.
things happening all at once. For
Oh
your
my.
father passed away. Well,
Yeah,
first you get a new job,
yeah,
but on the opposite coast, and your father passes away, and then you do a major move, and your daughter gets married.
yeah.
Yeah,
Son starts college.
yeah.
It
So it
was
starts to come.
crazy. It's crazy.
All in the midst of COVID.
All in the midst of COVID.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So So, what is your family like? I mean, you spoke a little bit about, you know, when your daughter was like 1.5. You saw sort of your behavior reflecting, you know, your father's old behavior,
Yeah. Yeah.
and yeah. So, what was it like in terms of like, oh, you know, did you make uh, certain decisions, you and Elena,
Right.
about like what kind of parents you'll be, and that sort of thing? By the way, love Elena.
Yeah.
She is an amazing woman. You so lucked out.
Yes. Yes, I did.
Yes.
Um, so I think the first thing that was very helpful to us in terms of um, conceiving how we're going to raise our children was number one, we made a commitment early on to never argue in front of the kids about the kids, right? That we would always show a united front.
Hmm.
And then so basically, if anything we didn't like happening in some sort of, situation, we would talk about it privately, and discuss it. But never in front of the children. So we never gave them an opportunity to divide us and conquer us. That's number one. The other thing that I think is more significant is that I truly learned the whole pattern of discipline actually from scripture. Hebrews 12 in particular speaks about how discipline is a from God is actually a sign of love, and it was really like I think mind blowing for me to kind of realize, okay, this is the way I want to raise my children. Like where they will all never equate discipline with anger or hatred or anything like that, but they will always associate it with love. And in the right practice of discipline, I found out that discipline is actually the highest form of love because it hurts to discipline. It hurts you to discipline your child. You know, I mean, the most painful thing any loving parent goes through is seeing their child in pain. Whatever that may be, whether you take away something or you actually give them, corporal punishment or whatever, it's horrible. Like you don't want to do it. And it takes a lot of like uh, effort to even do that and go through it. It literally is something where I would tell my kids, like, I don't want to do this. I really don't, but I feel it as my duty to do so. And I mean, I made a lot of mistakes. It was never a perfect record, and with each one I made different mistakes because they're all different, you know. Um, but I feel like it was something so critical and important to whatever. If I can point to anything I've done with my kids that makes them likable, and like where they are in instinctively turned somewhat more outside of themselves, where they're naturally wanting to be inclined towards to be turned inward, they're turned outward to the needs of others, to pay attention to those things. It's all because of discipline just sort of helped them, like really come out of themselves in a way, in a very healthy way. And I'll be blunt. We instituted corporal punishment, but and here's the way I actually, it didn't just come out of like revelation where I read Hebrews and I was like, oh, this is what I need to do. It was because I was struggling with my first. And what happened was it went in this kind of a ways. Number one, I noticed that uh like I don't know where it came from, but this kind of rebellious attitude, like everyone says terrible twos or whatever. It's like where like I will say something clearly that she wasn't supposed to do, but she would still do it anyway. And then it came down to like, so For example, I still remember one time, you know, uh, anyway, well, the other thing was that when it came to this discipline, it was like, uh, I found out very quickly in a very terrible time. At some point, I could not increase the frequency or the intensity of of the discipline, right?
Wow.
So like
Wait,
I
she's
was like,
2 years old and she's
yeah,
testing you to that limit. Wow.
and I was like, oh, basically, like these kids, they just develop what I call iron butt, right? Where it didn't matter anymore. It was almost like they were just like it was, and then I felt like there was a hardening, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it was completely the opposite of what I wanted to see happen. And so this is where the scripture really kind of, informed me and helped me. Where discipline used to be something where I had to express my anger, even though I wasn't really that angry, and so forth, and kind of like, emphasize how terrible and bad it was that they had done. It was like a breakthrough moment when, because I saw all this happening and it was like really bad. I decided, okay, I'm gonna just uh, I'm gonna try and make it and associate discipline with love as much as possible. So I first started to talk to her, and I made a commitment to not enter into that time of discipline angry. If I was angry, I would not do it, and I would just take time to cool off, whatever, and then I just come and speak to her. And then what I did was I said, I explained what had happened and why she needed to be disciplined. And then I did this like I don't know why I decided to do it, but I actually held her while I gave her the memme. In Korean, it's called memme, right? So I gave her, the 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 smack on the butt. So I'm holding her and I'm giving her the smack on the butt. And I found it like so incredible where like it didn't take a lot, or it wasn't even that hard, and she just broke, like something broke,
Hmm.
where she had somehow understood that she had broken some rule of love between us. That's what I call it, that she had broken some rule of love between us. And so the cry was no longer like this angry cry and hurt cry. It was a cry of like just repentance, almost like, that they were actually sorry for it and everything.
Yeah.
So it was a real revelation, because from that point on, like I wound up where I was able to put it into the context of love in such a way that, they didn't run to mom after they got mem. They came to me, for the comfort.
Uh-huh.
Immediately, even after I given them meme or something, they would come to me. Now, let me clarify to all the listeners, as far as the corporal punishment was concerned, I didn't even have to do a lot of it. It was a 5 meme system, basically, right? And it
Five
was only,
smacks.
yeah, 5 smacks, like meaning it was either 5 or 1, okay? And it never went beyond 5, and it
Uh-huh.
was only a way to kind of, for them to understand the degree of infraction, right? Like, so for example, like one of the things I wanted to do was to say to them, like, okay, you don't disrespect mom. Like, if she calls you once, you need to respond no matter what you're doing, right? And so, she calls twice, 3 times, and they don't respond. I'm like, okay, just heard mom call you twice and 3 times, and you did not respond. Okay, that's 2 meme, something like that, right?
Yeah.
Now then, and I'm a firm believer in sinful nature. All of a sudden, my daughter, I don't know where she picked it up from, or she doesn't pick it up, it just comes naturally, and it's as a self-protective kind of instinct. She lied.
Right.
Like, lying was like, and we were just like, where did she get to? And I was like, wow, this is sinful nature. Anyway, um lying was a like a level 5 meme, like a level 5, 5 meme, thing, like it was that bad. So between that, and it was we just try to be consistent, and it was thankfully I felt it very effective and fruitful, for them. And in point of fact, it became such that as time went on, and as early as we began it, as time went on, had to do less and less of it till it just basically we never had to lay a hand on them. All we had to do was it was a tone.
Mm-hmm.
It was and then if I saw something, I would just basically like eat in, and then they knew that there was something serious that was coming, and then I would explain, you're doing this right now, and this I don't think is good or healthy or whatever else, whatever that may be, and then so it and they all grew up that way, in such a way that, like, it became very strange for me when I would be in the company of other families and other children, and they would be basically like, going crazy, for things that, like I just kids just never did, like, where they were insisting on something or throwing a tantrum, or where we went to the store and they wanted something from the toy store. Like they never went, we would go through aisles and aisles of toys and whatever else, and they'd never go, oh, I want this. Dad, get this for me, like, and oh, come on, please, please. No, nothing like that, and so it was just this kind of like, but then at the same time, I have to be honest, I mean, I I wanted to lavish them, with things. So even before, like, so what I did as a parent was I said, before they even come up with the desire for it, like this kind of like burning desire for something, I wanted to meet that need, like, and give it as something coming from me,
Hmm.
where they didn't have to insist on it in a way. And so
There's.
that was also something, like I said. So, and also let me also mention, for every like statement of correction or instance of correction and discipline, I made it a point to be affirming, and affirming them in all the good that they were doing, like 5 times more. So for every one, it was like a ratio of 1 to 5. For every act of discipline, I wanted 5 affirmations of either love or their position, their standing, whatever that may be. And so, and I think the kind of intentional, like, being aware and engaged with what they were doing at any given time, and jumping in and correcting them as they needed to be corrected, and being just diligent about it, has paid off for us in a remarkable way, where we absolutely love time together.
Hmm.
Like, there's just no issues, nothing. Nobody's crying for themselves or wanting this and that in their own way. We just delight in our time together.
Yeah. Yeah. And I saw that when I visited you.
Mm.
That you guys just genuinely enjoy spending time together. And that takes work. It doesn't happen automatically.
Right.
Um and um and yeah, and I was only there one night. I wasn't even there that long. One
Mm.
afternoon and one evening,
Yeah.
and then next day, like 4 o'clock in the morning, I was, or actually even earlier than that, because I had to go up to Seattle. um, yeah. Um, so, well, first of all, great parenting. Good
Thank
job
you.
to
Thank
you
you.
and your
Praise
your
God.
wife.
Oh God.
I know. Yes.
Give him the glory. I used to be here. Let me tell you one other thing, though. I used to be very prideful, like, because my kids were so, not like typical, or what a lot of people would come to me for, in terms of counseling and different things like that. I would just be like, oh, you gotta do this, you gotta do that, and eventually I just really wound up like, oh Lord, this is so much pride on my part, and I had to really be like humble about it, and grow in humility. I'm still trying to, but um I'm thankful that, like, at some point, like, and my wife is very good about keeping me accountable to that, because she saw me getting all excited, like trying to teach, and so she'd just be like, "Come on, honey, you need to calm down." Just too much information all at once and all this other kind of things. But anyway, yeah, it's something I'm absolutely like, like every day I can be thankful for this, of how they are, how they represent their faith, each one having come to their own expression of it almost really naturally, you know, um, and yeah, and just this absence of conflict of what is
Mm.
is really like where it's almost accepted and a given that it's going to happen, and that's, I think, sad to me, is that people will come to me and go, so, they'll ask me like, Pastor Iggy, how did you handle it when your kids went into, the adolescence and they had this rebellion thing, right? And I just be like,
Oh no.
sorry, I just, and then I get very sad. I'm like, I can't relate with it, and that's the
Yeah.
thing. It's like I can't relate with that because it just never happened. It just never materialized. Like even now, my son just turned 16 years old, and he's the last of them. But when you're, and what I've seen in terms of typical pattern as I've done youth ministry and so forth, is that year 10 and 11 are the worst years as far as high school students are concerned. That's when they're on full on, like, they have the immortal, the
Yeah.
immortality enzyme running through them, like where they're just on a growth pattern, and they think, like, they have this idea like they know everything and all this stuff, and so they're most rebellious, in my opinion, around that time. Then when
That's
they get
like
to
15
senior
or
year,
16.
yeah, then when they get into
Yeah.
a senior year, they get a little more humble because they're about to graduate and they're like,
Yeah.
going on. And so there's like, okay, now, there's a little bit more of a soberness coming in. And typically speaking, I think parents really need to be careful during those years, so that you have to ride it well. You can't, if you try and, that's when most of the possible trauma happens, I think, in terms of relationships,
Hmm.
where because of that's such a there's such a separation, or a, like, I'm on my own, I can do my own thing. They're discovering themselves, they're discovering their own power, in a sense, and they feel it all through, you know what I mean, like, hormonally, everything. And they're just kind of like, and it's during that time when parents aren't able to sort of ride that well, they can cause a lot of trauma, coming out of it, you know
Yeah, they are becoming their own person, and figuring out their own identity that's apart
right,
from that of their being their parent's
right,
child.
right,
And that, I guess that's also when their peers have incredible amount of influence.
right,
Um, but I also think that the foundation of the early years, uh, the love and discipline and boundaries and structure you give them in their early years,
yeah,
have a lot to do with that as well. Because when you
sure,
don't
sure,
have a solid
yeah.
foundation, then, right, you can easily be swayed.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And I think another helpful thing I would share is that the doctrine of total depravity is really healthy. And
Hmm.
what I mean by that is, you have this understanding that, um, biblically speaking, we believe in, um, the fact that we are corrupted by sin, even in our nature. And not only that, we're not only sinful when we sin, but we there's a corruption that has entered into every part of who we are, right? And understanding and believing that in my approach to the discipline, I think, was very helpful, because I never treated my children like, oh, they're just angels, they just kind of like,
Right.
you know what I mean, where and then all of a sudden become surprised when they sin, or when they rebel against you, or talk back, or anything like that, or do something, That's what I often found with families as well, is that parents would go, my kids were fine up till a certain point, and then all of a sudden they just turned around like in 180 degrees, and they literally shocked,
Yeah.
and they don't, and they couldn't believe this about their children, and then they blame everything, like they blame the church, they blame their friends, and all these other kinds of things, and it just goes very, very unhealthy. And so, but that understanding that they needed that kind of structure and discipline early on, and I mean early on. Here's another story.
How
So,
early? When you because you
well,
you emphasized early.
yeah. So, for example, with my daughter, right? Okay, she was, I think, 3 months old, and she's she's fed, she's swaddled. I'm holding her. Every physical need I could think of, she had, right? But she was just raging, like right. And I was like, what do I do? Like there's something here that's like, it's not, it's beyond this, just this physical need that she had. She has, I mean, checked her diaper, made sure she was comfortable, hold her clothes. She just needed to sleep, but she didn't want to sleep. And even at like 3 months. So what happened was, I was holding her, and as I was holding her, I said, how can I reach her? How can I tell her that she's kind of in the wrong here, right? Without hurting her. So I just held her and went, no, right? And I remember just shocked when she just basically, like, her crying stopped, and it went from one of raging to one of a little bit of sadness, and then she was out like a light.
Yeah.
you know and I just learned something from that as well, like those little moments. And I guess that's led to the later on, in the when she was 2 or so, and then in this full on kind of like rebellion, it just helped me understand, like, yeah, it's not about the intensity or the frequency, and to prove your point that you've done something wrong. It's about connecting it with some kind of, like, a deeper level, like, uh, break in a love relationship. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah. So just taking that example for a minute. So one may argue like, it's a baby. Iggy, this
Right.
is a baby. What do they know? They're just
Yeah.
acting instinctively, and yet, what you're saying is, no, that even as young as three
Yeah.
months old,
Yeah.
that there is some, uh, that there is actual motive and intention and some will. There's a level of will there.
As they
Yeah.
grow, this it grows. You know what I mean? At
Yeah.
the beginning, they all they know is instinct, right? To cry, and all these things for their particular needs, right? But what happens when, you again, and that was what the situation was. I was just, there was nothing that we think she needs, except, and she should be fine, but she's not,
Hmm.
right? And um and and and, and, and it's interesting because, and one of the things that I saw in a pattern as far as raising children are concerned is that right before they need to sleep, they're at their worst.
Yes.
Yeah, they're just tantrums, or this manic kind of a thing that they're going through, and they just can't stop themselves, and things like that. And so you need to be, and again, that's, to me, that's indication of, like, what I call, the influence of sinful nature, corrupted through and through. That's it's theologically speaking, it's called the imputation of Adam's sin, which means that when Adam sinned, everything became corrupted, right? And then so it's not, there's a sin that is imputed, meaning you didn't have anything to do with it, but it comes to you anyway as a whole. And then there's a sin of commission, where you willfully do something you're not told you're not supposed to do, etc., right? And most of the focus, I think, in our day and age, is on the sins of
Commission.
commission, where basically it's like, children are, what's wrong, they're innocent, they've never done anything, right?
And you ask any parent, children are not innocent.
Yeah, no, exactly. And again,
Yeah.
the corruption leads to things like I said, like where did she learn how to lie?
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like who, and then immediately we think it's something outside of them, like somebody has told them or taught them or she saw an example. And that's not what it is.
No.
It's born out of this sort of natural instinct to just protect themselves, you know what I mean, from whatever consequence they think will come, and it's really fascinating in that way. So anyway,
Yeah.
that has helped me in terms of my approach to discipline. And obviously we prayed a lot as well. We really ask God for wisdom and how we can better parent. We ask God to give them the strength to fight sin in themselves and so forth. And that's been, I mean, it's in all honesty, in our day and age, as good as they may have been, they were always struggling with sin, you know
Mm-hmm.
and or like it was something that was very that uh, uh afflicted them in very significant ways. Like for example, my daughter, when she entered middle school, she was exposed to pornography
Mm.
at school, and all of a sudden I would find her up in the morning on my computer.
Mm.
And then she didn't know that I could actually do search history and whatnot, and found out that she was surfing these sites that she had been shown.
Mm.
And so even at that early age of, like, I think it was like 13 or whatever, she was, it had captured her imagination,
Mm-hmm.
and then it took her actually a while to really kind of address that for herself.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's not like
Wow.
they're perfect, you know what I mean? They're not, and then both of my boys, forget about it. I mean, I mean, it's even worse now than it was,
Yeah.
and continuing to be. And then, so they're constantly, sharing with me, and we we come alongside them, and we try to, help them along, and really just preach the gospel to them about forgiveness at first, and then, applying whatever discipline we can. I don't give them memme anymore, but we do kind of, like whether we withhold some things or whatever else, and just try to keep them accountable and help them again through this time,
Yeah.
where it's all of this, the worldliness is pressing upon them. So I mean, it's just a constant struggle, but
So it also seems that they're your kids. They talk to you about stuff. Or do they come voluntarily and talk to you about
yes,
stuff, or
yes, they do.
you
and
have to
and, and I
prod
think
them a
that,
little?
right, I feel like very thankfully they're very self-effacing about the kinds of struggles that they're going through.
Mm.
My boys in particular come to me and ask me, like, how do you deal with it, Dad?
Mm.
How do you fight through this kind of thing? And
Mm-hmm.
so they ask me about it, and I share with them my own personal stories and things like that, and how I've learned to, fight it, and fight that corruption, of instinct and soul and everything else. So
Um. Yeah. I mean, I think as much as it is important for the kids to feel the you know the confidence
yeah,
and and assurance that they could approach their parents about difficult subjects, parents also need to be confident to be able to talk about it.
yeah, absolutely,
And
yeah,
that's often sometimes the harder thing,
yeah,
is we don't necessarily have the necessary tools
sure,
and language and to
yeah,
address difficult subjects.
yeah.
Yeah.
It occurs to me that I think there was something that my dad did in a negative way that I think I did commit to doing in a positive way.
Mm-hmm.
Was that he never shared with me, his thoughts, right? I'd go to ask him, like, about his books, right? And he'd be like, "Oh, you're too young to understand them." So he wouldn't,
Oh, I hate that.
right. So I remember being kind of dissed like that in when I was growing up. And so with me, with my children, it was an all out, like, I'm sharing everything. I'm sharing with them my struggles. I'm sharing with them, everything that I'm going through, like even with my faith. I remember times where I would sit in front of them, and when I perceived a certain sin that I was that had been revealed to me, I shared with them about that. Like, for example, like, I think I had made an idol of all of my, like, even my computer building and stuff. I took a lot of, like, worldly pride in, building these things, and what one message convicted me on was these monuments to myself, right?
Oh, really?
And
Was that your Tower of Babel?
well, oh, yeah, I mean, it's just like, no, it was just a message I was listening to, and it's like we were constantly trying to build things that kind of reflect back on us and give us a sense of, like, accomplishment or
Yeah.
justification and whatnot, and I was like, oh my gosh, that's what I've been doing, like, with all these things, and in such a way that, like, where my kids, when they when they invited their friends over, and I was the cool dad. I mean, I love being the cool dad, right? And they would invite their friends over, and then they would literally give them a tour of our home and all of the different tech things I put in here and there. They'd bring them to my garage, and it's like, oh, this is my dad's workspace. See how cool it is, all this stuff that he's doing. And then, upstairs we had almost like a PC bang thing kind of going on. So they would
Yeah.
show them everything. And I remember one time just being, like, really convicted. I'm like, and I sat them down and I said, kids, listen to me. You might think that I find it good, or I find some kind of pleasure in seeing you doing that with your friends. But I said, I'm actually ashamed.
Hmm.
I said, this is a point of shame for me, because I don't want you to be where the one thing that you show or are so proud of is all of this technology that I have, like, set up, whatever else that may be. I mean, it's excessive. It could be, it's obsessive
Mm-mm.
almost. And I said, I'm struggling with that. I'm trying to, like, whittle it down. And so I remember, like, really kind of, sharing with them that struggle. And it's that kind of level of, like, I think, sharing that has been also very helpful,
Hmm.
in terms of our relationship, and that they understand, again, I'm explaining where it's coming from, why it's happening,
Hmm.
whether it's discipline or other things that are going on. One of the things that I found incredible about 2018 into 2019 was in the fall of 2018. I came to, kind of, there was it came to mind that there was a possibility that I was going to be leaving that ministry in Portland by the end of 2018, and that my particular position was in jeopardy. The first people I shared it with was my wife and my boys and my children, and my daughter was at school at the time, but I shared it with them. I said, this is a possibility, and I want you to pray for me, pray with me. And so they were with me every step of the way through the whole transition and everything else. And I would give them updates on what was happening, how it happened, how God was gracious in this moment, and all these other things, in such a way that they never felt bitter or angry or sad. I mean, there was some sadness about having to maybe possibly leave their friends and whatnot, but
Sure. Yeah.
it was balanced with this kind of, understanding that there was a purpose in this, and so it sustained them through, in such a way that, I think my son, Jonathan, has made a rather difficult transition, from Portland to here. Now, interestingly enough, COVID was helpful in that regard,
Yeah.
because it basically nullified all the relationships anyway, like, brought it all to kind of ground zero, where the only way you could interact was by virtual
Yeah.
means. And so that kind of made it, it leveled everything in that way, and then he was able to build on that. And now, yeah, so many different things, but all, with this very intentional communication, showing them things about faith, walking with them, like pointing things out. Like when we watch movies, they expect that we're going to have some discussion on
Hmm.
on a theological level, like what was its value, how does it speak to how does it add to and affirm the truth we believe, or how does it speak against it in some way, or whatever that may be, right?
Do you do that with everything?
I mean, I try to just kind of put into context. I say, just take a step back
Mm-hmm.
and look at it in this picture, and yeah, like I mean, with music, even like I point out lyrics or things like that, right? And even their games. I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, you see what you're doing here? You're playing Diablo 3, right? And your whole point of it is you become this superhero who is able to kill the devil, right?
Mm-hmm.
And and,
Okay.
and it's
I
about
don't know.
and
Yeah.
yeah. Anyway, it's like, so anyone who's listening who plays games knows it's like a dungeon crawler is all about getting enough, working through the dungeon, right? Grinding is called, in order to get yourself powerful enough to defeat the enemy, the boss,
Yeah.
right? Which is the
The,
devil.
so just a quick side note.
Yeah,
I recently heard a conversation about the benefits of gaming.
yeah,
There's you know this better than I do. There's a huge gaming community and
right.
culture or
Yeah, it's
subculture.
growing.
Yeah. Well, yeah, probably because of COVID maybe, but
Mhm.
I mean, it was huge,
Yeah,
even before that. And how it helps with imagination one, but it also helps with like especially the world building kind of games. Not the like shoot 'em up, kind of
right.
stuff where it's
Yeah,
very pointless.
yeah,
But especially the world building type of games where you're establishing rules and structures and different things, and how it provides this virtual world provides a kind of a space where young minds can like exercise different things
yes,
and learn different things. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, so it's not all wasted time.
No, I mean, I've seen
There's a
it's
limit though.
a long time ago. I've seen where people who were in these massively online role playing games, like World of Warcraft, where they have to actually manage like clans, like these people, and they have to manage it. Like that is now legit cred on resumes, where they say, yeah, I managed a clan of like, 1,000 people. You know what I mean?
Really?
Yeah,
Wow.
because it takes a lot of like managerial skills to kind of like, kick out people who are not helping, and and disputes and whatever, and those kinds of things, and setting goals for your particular clan and everything, all in the
Yeah.
virtual realm,
Yeah.
and which actually translates well into real world. And
Uh,
then
yeah, and I think just to know, because I don't know enough about gaming. So in that virtual world, so all the other uh, members of the clan, behind each member is an actual person, right?
right.
Right. That's how it works, right? Yeah.
Right,
Okay.
right, yeah. So there's a yeah. They just have their avatars and whatnot, and then everyone, has the real life, and in Tron language, the user.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so that kind of um skill building over years, like some who have been in it for years, they
Mm-hmm.
have this kind of like where they can say, yeah, I've legitimately, done this thing for this many years, and you can list your accomplishments, what you've done with your clan, let's say, and
Wow.
they're recognized in a corporate sense. There's also now, when it comes to even qualifying for fine motor skills that are used for hand-eye coordination, for laser surgery or laser microscopic surgery, you have to actually test by playing games.
Hmm.
and how well you coordinate your hand and eye in order to then qualify for, or to be able to handle these particular machines and things like that. So there are, yeah, definitely a lot of applications.
Yeah, yeah. Sorry. Yeah, I was just that that it's actually a very interesting thing.
It is. It is.
One that I have never actually participated in. There was a conference that I attended many years ago. It was on transmedia storytelling. So where so transmedia is like where the story starts in one media form, but continues in others.
Ah,
So like let's say it starts with like fan fiction that then becomes a game, and through that game, the story continues and the characters develop
sure.
further, and
Yeah.
then it becomes something else, that
Oh
type
yeah,
of thing.
yeah, yeah. There's a lot of that going around
Yeah.
for sure.
But that's when I first came across the whole gaming thing, because there was
Yeah,
one talk about the
yeah.
whole game world, and I think it was Warcraft, or the whole thing was like people were building things,
Right,
and I was looking at it, and I'm like, I don't get it.
right. Yeah, it's I think I've always been kind of a technophile, and so it's a little bit more understandable to me,
Mm.
like, and even, I mean, I'll be honest, like 2018, um I was I think 2018 or a part of 20 to 2017, I was actually mining Bitcoin.
Were
I
you?
was. Not that I actually saved it Bitcoin, because I was like, oh, I got Bitcoin, I can spend it. So I wound up spending it,
Oh,
unfortunately. I think I might have, I don't know, it's just a little bit left somewhere. I actually gave it to my friend to manage, but it's not a real significant amount, but it's growing. I mean, it's like
it's
huge.
50 above $50,000
Yeah,
right now.
exactly. You're right.
I
And so
know.
I was in it when it was around 4,000, you know.
Okay,
So
though that's
it's fine.
still,
It's like
yeah.
incredible. But the thing was, I understood from gamers that I was ministering to in the church
Mm.
why this was something that could have value in the future. It's
Mm-hmm.
because it's about what you give value, what a community will say is valuable.
Mm-hmm.
And it's been that idea has been around forever, because like things like this game called Diablo or whatever else, they would have a marketplace where they would sell certain items that were randomly computer generated, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that had a certain value that they would put it on the market, and then people would pay real money to buy it, but all
Yeah.
in virtual space, and now that's
Yeah.
happening right now that in the news this whole week was about these
NFTs.
digital, yeah, these digital images and things like that, or media that people are owning, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's blowing up.
it's huge. Yeah, it's blowing up huge.
It's actually a friend of mine that I met back in 2018. She introduced me to the whole digital art space, but
Yeah,
I didn't do anything with
right,
it.
right, right.
She actually suggested I was showing her some photographs for my trip,
Yeah,
and I was like, "Oh, that's cool, that's cool." And she was like, "I wonder how much that would actually fetch in XYZ market." And I'm like, "What's that?" And she was like explaining, and I'm still like trying to
sure.
understand.
Yeah,
And she's
exactly.
like, "Yeah, you should try it. You should put it up there and price it at 10,000."
Right,
And
right.
I'm like, "What?"
Yeah, yeah. No, it's crazy.
Yeah.
But just I have about 10 minutes, just FYI.
Oh yes. Okay. Yes. So okay. So that yeah. Let's kind of start wrapping things up then. I still think you have a book in there somewhere, a book or something. No, seriously.
Yeah.
um.
I mean, I'm open to the idea, and that might be something I should more seriously pray about and reflect on. Um, uh, thank you for bringing it up again and reminding me, because it's something I shouldn't dismiss, or I should really kind of think about. Um,
Yeah, because I mean, aside, I think it's less about the specific things that you did with your children and bringing them up, but it's I think the whole approach, the whole
Right.
sort of concept and philosophy and the
Yeah.
principles, and um, yeah, even if it's not, I think it's important that, because you're a faith-based person, that that's where it comes from.
Sure.
But even aside from that, I think there are still a lot of things in there
Yeah.
that will be universally beneficial.
Hmm.
Yeah. Um, yeah. So
Okay.
so maybe that's a good note. That's a good note to end. So, future author, podcaster, a ministry of a different kind.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, I'm open. Like I said, like I think COVID in particular has sort of blown up everything, and so we're all exploring all these different opportunities and different ways to connect and you know do life. So it's
Hmm.
highly possible.
Oh, and here's a thought. You could also bring your kids into it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, where it's like
Sure.
you and your kids and your wife, a whole family discussing different family issues.
Sure.
Yeah,
Sure. Yeah.
could be a whole family thing.
Well, it
But
might be.
I mean, there is though the question of like, well, once you put yourself out there, then you do become public,
Right.
right? So there is that, and that's something that I am still sort of not completely fixed on or have
Right.
completely
Right.
decided on, even as I'm doing this,
Yeah.
that yeah,
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
exposing myself in ways that uh
Yeah.
why am I actually doing this? I'm
Right. Right.
hoping that it
Yeah.
would help somebody. Yeah.
Right. Right. Sure. Sure. Yeah. I mean, I don't know. Book maybe not so much. I don't know. We'll see. But
Yeah, yeah. Anyway, I'm just planting seeds.
okay. Thanks.
All right, great. Yeah, I don't know. Do you have places where do you want people to follow you? I asked this on, to everyone. Um,
Um. I mean, um. I don't really. I don't do like Twitter or Instagram.
yeah.
I put up posts on Facebook, from time to time that I feel I think are, it's sometimes it's just me venting or there's something I need to express. Sometimes I think that particular thought or whatever is helpful, but other than that, I don't really do much in terms of being media present or presence, in
Mm,
media. But yeah,
yeah.
I don't know if I'm still deciding whether I'm too old for that or not.
I don't think age has anything to do with it. I
Sure,
think
sure.
I think it's like depends on what you want to do with it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Yeah, I mean, I think I've toyed with the idea of just actually doing like if I did anything, was do um, a, a YouTube on PC building.
that can be cool too. No, seriously. Yeah.
So yeah, I just think, yeah, there's a lot of things I could share on how to do builds, but
And the PC building can be an analogy to other things. I don't know. But anyway, it's been so much fun. It was so much fun talking to you.
yeah, it's great talking with you, JJ. Thanks for leading me
Yeah.
down some memory lanes and
Yeah.
things like that.
And thank you for making me cry like more than on any other episode, I think.
Well, we had some very moving topics.
Mm, mm, yeah, yeah. Well, and please come back anytime. We could talk about anything.
Okay,
Um,
cool.
I know this was a topic that I particularly wanted to explore with you,
Thanks.
but if there's anything that you want to explore or even just vent, um, my channel is always open to you. So yeah,
All right.
hit me
Okay.
up anytime. All right.
Thanks, JJ.
All right, thank you. So, thanks
Yeah.
everyone for listening and
Yeah.
watching. Please follow Beer Cake with JJ Co on social media. And the podcast is now streaming on most streaming services, so you can find this podcast. And right now, I'm on a campaign to get at least 100 subscribers on my YouTube channel so
Nice.
that I could get a unique URL because right now it's just gobbledygook. Yeah, YouTube requires you have to have at least 100 subscribers before you
Nice.
can like personalize it. So, so please find me and subscribe. All right.
Yes. Please do.
Yeah. Thanks everyone. Thanks, Iggy.